Welcome back to Green Disruptors Scaling the Future. I'm your host, Megan Kerr, and in today's episode, we're diving into the ocean, literally and figuratively. I'm joined by Anjana Aravind, COO and co-founder of Blusink, a startup that's harnessing marine calcification to lock carbon emissions away for good. From her roots in climate research to pioneering scalable solutions in the carbon removal industry, Anjana offers one of the most compelling climate tech stories that I've heard. So let's get into it. Welcome back to Green Disruptors. We have another exciting conversation coming today. This podcast is brought to you by Mountaintop Social Marketing, where we help green tech companies scale. And today we are going to be talking with the COO and co-founder of Blusink. So I want Anjana to introduce herself. Hi.
Hi, Megan. So nice to be here. Yeah, and I love the focus of this podcast. Anything sustainable should be everyone's interest in this today's age.
Yeah, whether or not you're in the business or not, it's relevant to everyone.
Exactly. So briefly, my background is as a climate researcher. So I studied physics, but specialized in oceanography and earth sciences, and also researched on sea ice interaction, especially on Antarctic basal ice melt. And then went on a research expedition back in 2019 on a German vessel called Polarstern. That is where I met my current co-founder, Lorena. She's a biologist. And I then went on to work for the wind energy industry, and she went on to develop the patent for the material that ultimately became the core of Blusink's technology. We started Blusink in 2022. And now we're here. We are growing.
I think there was a lot contained in that little summary, and I'm personally curious to go into the field that you're in. It's a lot of intense schooling and projects and all that. What led you in that direction to begin with?
Yeah, it's a very funny story. So when I was, I think 17 or 18, just before I joined uni, my dad introduced me to Al Gore's documentary, An Inconvenient Truth. I watched that documentary, and until then, climate change was a distant problem. And then I watched that documentary and I was like, I'm actually seeing what he's showing in the documentary. I'm seeing it firsthand. Because, so little cultural background, I grew up in Singapore, which is a city that's, very corporate, very like everything's perfect and done for you, kind of. So you see climate change from most cities. When you grow up in that bubble of convenience, you don't realize that climate change is affecting actual food production. Exactly. Everything. You don't see the supply chain at all, right? So it's someone else's problem. And that's the way it was until I moved to India. And as a teenager, and my parents decided to move. And there I saw how every year the biggest news was not, like Apple just IPO'd. It was like June, the monsoon season has been crazy late this year, or the monsoon is coming super early. There's been floods, there's been landslides. And that was such a common occurrence.
Narrative.
Yeah, and something that we heard quite often in the news that I was like, wow, so these things happen, and they happen in, countries where there's agriculture, where there's production, where you can actually see that food doesn't directly come from you don't think of food as coming from the supermarket, you can actually see the production, right? And so that opened my eyes to the reality of the world in some sense. Exactly. And also how weather and climate are so important for people. How, you can have, overall, you might have the same amount of rain this year as you did last year. But if all of that rain was concentrated in 10 days instead of spread over 3 months, that means your agricultural production was completely disrupted. And, it's the poorest people who have to bear the brunt of that. So I connected those two dots and I was like, I want to do something in this space. I want to help however I can, but I just don't know where to start. And I think physics was one of those, I didn't like biology and chemistry seemed too complicated. So I was like, physics makes sense because you can deduce stuff. And then I was I'll go into physics, and I know that you can go into so many things with that. It's a science that applies to everything. So from there, I specialized in earth sciences and oceanography just to understand the depth of the problem. But then I hit this wall where I was like, I'm in academia. I'm talking about the problem so much. So I was modeling how fast Antarctic ice sheets are melting. I mean, I worked in the Potsdam Institute in Germany and the Climate Change Research Center in Australia. And we were modeling doomsday, basically. but we were not. Exactly. It's so depressing. And I was like,
Yeah.
okay, I kind of want to get into industry and figure out how to solve it from a technological perspective. So then I was like, oh, sustainable energy. Let's go into renewable energy. Let's start there because that's something that everyone needs is energy. Went into wind energy industry and realized that the wind industry also has its own set of narratives that, like a lot of, they're trying their best, I would say, but there's a lot of lack of climate knowledge in that space, which is very interesting considering it's an industry that's so reliant on climate and weather, but you'll rarely find climate or weather specialists work in those industries.
It's utility people.
Yes, it's utility people. Yeah. It's engineers, but very rarely do you see climate forecasters, And that's what you need because they're always surprised when wind turbines are not giving the output they wanted because they expected it to be a certain way, but then climate change is happening and it's impacting them as well. So we don't realize how many industries are getting affected by climate change because we just assume that it's, in people's eyes, it's like 100-year, 200-year, not my generation problem. But it's already...
Oh, it's a 20 years ago severe impact.
Exactly. So I think but then it brought me closer to industry, and I also realized, I saw that with industry, it's faster to solve problems, right? Because it's through industry that you can actually impact people's lives, and then it's through industry that you can change systems. So yeah, Blusink, my co-founder, after she patented the material, we decided to start the company because she saw that it was so good at settling a kind of algae that permanently removes carbon emissions. And that's one of the key problems that the carbon removal industry today faces, is the permanency of the captured carbon. There are so many methods to capture the carbon emissions. However, to store them away permanently is another, you have to use adaptive technologies for that. You have to join another solution just to solve that aspect. Whereas this was inherent in the product itself. And what it ultimately...
Tell us exactly, tell us how the product works. Sure. And you were getting there, but
yeah. Sorry, I went on this segue, but
no, it's all good.
So Blusink is based on the concept of carbon capture on seafloors through calcification in the long term. So if I were to put it simply, maybe we take calcification out of it. Let me start. Okay, so
Blusink, layperson speak.
Yes. Blusink does marine carbon capture through rocks, basically. So we make rocks that we place on empty or damaged seabeds, which provide a settlement or housing substrate for a certain kind of macroalgae that like to convert dissolved carbon emissions in the ocean into pink rock. So the ocean, to kind of wind that back a bit, the ocean is the largest absorber of the emissions that we put out into the atmosphere. So it absorbs almost half of what we put into the atmosphere. And it's because of the ocean that we haven't reached unbearable levels of warming yet. The reason that
it's taking the brunt of it for us and sheltering us a little bit.
Exactly. So the reason that we haven't reached that 1.5 is because of the oceans. But the ocean is, I like to say, it's at an all-you-can-eat buffet of carbon emissions. And at some point, it's going to stop. It's going to get saturated. And it is reaching saturation levels in a lot of areas, some more so than others. It just depends on coastlines and stuff. What taking up carbon emissions also means for ocean ecosystems is acidification and death of several kinds of ecosystems, because it destroys a lot of the fundamental organisms that are living in those areas and that are needed by other organisms, right? So what Blusink does is provide a kind of luxury housing for this macroalgae that like to eat up that dissolved carbon in the ocean. So it helps the ocean to take away the dissolved carbon. And then it solidifies that. So the algae when it dies, it turns into pink rock. So it's pink carbon rocks that get settled on the seafloor. So we accelerate that process. In nature, it happens over a time period of 10 years. So this is not a process that, that's completely unheard of. It happens in nature. But it takes a time period of 10 years, and we make it happen in less than 2. So we're accelerating that natural process. In that same vein, we're also creating a benthic layer on top of which other marine ecosystems can thrive. So when you dive and you see coral reefs, people rarely notice rhodoliths or marl beds. These are the pink rocks that exist below the coral reefs. So if you think of corals as trees, these guys are the soil to the forest. So we're creating the soil basically. And you cannot have healthy trees without healthy soil, right? So that's what we're building.
That's amazing. I love how, and it seems like all climate solutions kind of boil down to mimicking something that already happens in nature.
Exactly.
So that's
Nature's
pretty
the
cool.
best teacher.
It is, yes. So tell me how that works from a business model perspective. Like where's the capital come from and all that?
Sure. So with the carbon model, what we're looking at is carbon credits. So obviously there's the voluntary carbon market and then there's the accredited or compliance markets. For compliance, you need to get your methodology accredited by one of the certifiers like Vera or Puro. We are currently working on getting our methodology accredited. And then on the voluntary carbon markets, buyers can choose to buy any amount of carbon credits that they want from suppliers that they believe in. So how the carbon credit market looks like today is there are countries that have regulations on carbon credits, right? And you have to remove a certain ton. You have to compensate for the amount of carbon that you're putting out. In some countries, like Singapore, for example, I think it's $25 per ton of emissions that you put out, so that it's taxed. And that's great. So you want to work ideally in countries where they have regulations like that, so you have buyers that are interested in buying carbon removals. Some countries are also open to like giving you avoidance credits, like, oh, I could have, like for green concrete, for example, you can say that, okay, my concrete production could have emitted this much, but then I didn't. So avoidance and removal are two separate ways of dealing with this. I would say like removal is more impactful just because it's removing existing emissions, and that's what we need with carbon credits in the like who buys them, right? So you look at industries that put out a lot of emissions. So we're talking about shipping, offshore energy, people who have like emissions intensive production. So like concrete, steel. These are the companies that are usually buying. But I would also say tech companies are buying up a lot of carbon credits. So you can see like Frontier, for example, is a coalition kind of Microsoft, all of these big players who have such large data servers and data farms that are putting out so much carbon emissions, and they have the conscientious choice of we want to remove what we're putting out. So you can sell to almost anybody who's interested in sustainability, I would say. But for us, the focus is industries that have seafloor access, primarily because we're a startup, we are small. We don't want to deal with getting that regulatory access when we're in such a small stage. So maritime partners are the best for us.
So how have you gone after these people so far? Like, is it like a typical sales process or is it different?
I would say it's been, so for context, like we are a completely remote team. My co-founder and I, we were working on a 10-hour time difference for almost 2 years. And we cover kind of South America, Europe, Asia in terms of where we're located, our team. It's never been a classic sales process because both of us are from science backgrounds. We don't know how to sales or marketing the way.
You're like, this is good, you need it.
Yeah, exactly. So we've always approached it as, there's been some like cold emails and stuff, but I think it's mostly events and accelerator programs and stuff that put us in touch with the right kind of audience. I would say, so right now, for example, I'm based in Abu Dhabi because we are part of this accelerator program called Hub 71, which is the UAE's startup ecosystem, and the government brings startups here. And that is a great program primarily because they open up doors to industry. So they will put you in touch with industries themselves. And that's been good. So we've had traction that way, but we've also had contacts through different events. Our pre-seed investor is Japanese. There's been some headway in that.
Some connections there.
But also, sorry.
Oh no, I was just going to say, tell me like what the next steps are going to be looking like in the next year, maybe the next 18 months.
Yeah.
As far as growth goes.
Yeah. So, so far we've had quite a lot of deployments, especially research deployments in several parts of the world. We've had feasibility deployments with partners. So Colombia, Portugal, Maldives, these are places that we've successfully deployed, and we have a lot of biodiversity data and carbon quantification data on. And we're building now in the direction of more deployments that will give us a large world map of where are the best spots to deploy. So in terms of growth, right now, our primary focus is accreditation, so that once we get the methodology accredited, it can be sold on compliance markets. We really want to get into that side of carbon credit.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. People that have to do it.
Exactly. And it's such a scalable solution that I think it can really disrupt CDR as an industry, because it's a very low cost technology. You can produce it anywhere in the world, easily manufacturable, easily deployable. So in terms of growth, right, this year we're just targeting that scaling up of manufacturing so that we can actually produce enough to deploy one large scale pilot, because our feasibility deployments have been great to understand, to get data from the regions. But what we need now is a large enough deployment that...
A large case study.
Exactly, a large case study that is fit for industry and commercial partners. So to get there, we also need to ramp up production, and we need to also test out the production in different factories, I would say. We're trying to make it a model that can be franchisable anywhere in the world, so that you don't have to have your own factory to produce this. It should be something that any country can make.
Any region has an easy supply. Yeah, that's cool. Well, it sounds like you're on the right track. How close are you to that accreditation?
So we're still, I guess, at least 6 months away from this methodology creation itself, in terms of we have the methodology from an EU-funded project called Rotocar. So the methodology is based on that. The carbon quantification has been done by the lead scientists of that research project. However, to have that methodology written up as a carbon crediting framework by a certifier is a separate process in itself. And so for that, I would say at least 6 months, because we're working with some top research institutes in the world to help us co-create that for submission.
So I'm going to ask you a somewhat cheesy question, but yeah. I like the analogy. So if you had a magic wand,
yes,
and could instantly fix maybe one of your biggest challenges in your business right now, what would that be?
Oh, tough. So many.
So many? Is that what you said?
Yeah, because there's so many little problems and they're so sales and marketing. Connected. We don't know how to do that.
Yeah.
But at the same time, what's the priority order? I would say accreditation would be the biggest. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just because it's the most cumbersome.
That's the door opener.
Yeah, that's the door opener, exactly. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Very cool. So, you're such a good communicator. I feel like we got all the main points out much quicker than I usually do.
Okay.
I'm like, we could be done at this point, but what are you most excited about, I guess?
Yeah.
And do you feel like you're in a better headspace being in this industry compared to being more the academic side of it?
Oh, for sure. So back in 2019, I think right after the expedition, I was wondering if I should do a PhD or go into industry. And I had only been exposed to, all my internships and everything was in academia. And I think in industry, you get to innovate and collaborate a lot more. So you get to talk to someone, hey, I like your idea, let's try something. And there is no weight of a academic paper to be written from that. Do you get what I mean? You can try, you can...
Yeah, absolutely.
You can make things, break things, do it fast and get it over with. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. And the consequences are much less on your time and energy. So it might be expensive consequences, but again, that's on you to decide.
But it's part of the process, and the industry understands
exactly
that's how it works with innovation.
Exactly. Whereas in academia, especially when you go into a PhD, a postdoc, as you keep increasing your academic rank, I feel you keep narrowing your focus. You have to narrow it so much, and then you get so siloed. When I was doing climate research, I felt like each research department is its own bubble, right? And they're not really... Mm-hmm. The climate science, the climate scientists, I wish that there would be more communication between climate scientists and economists. I know they're like quite separate, but I think the urgency of needing to solve climate change has to, like, economists have to feel the same sense of urgency for them to want to create economic systems that will help society accommodate that. You know what I mean?
Well, I mean, I would assume that the climate consequences affect the economy is number one. Like we can't do business, we can't function as society if, like you said, if all the crops are destroyed from...
Exactly.
So it's so relevant. So it's surprising that there's not more communication there.
Exactly. No, but I feel like they need to have a coffee together, you know, and really like see eye to eye on things, because I feel you can still sit in research circles in economics and not talk about climate change and not have to talk about climate change at all. And that's okay, right? No one expects you to. But yeah, I just wish there was more collaboration between different research.
So that's the broader magic wand that we need.
Yeah. There are so many parallels you can draw from, like neuroscience research to tech to all kinds of things, right? Like there's so many connections to be made, and I feel like that happens a lot.
I mean, that's what got us into this mess in the first place, is viewing everything so separately.
Exactly.
So,
like Da Vinci said, I don't know if I'm paraphrasing, but you know, art and science, like there's art in science, right? There's science and art as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, is there any last thing you'd like to touch on before we wrap it up here?
Not from my side, no.
Okay. Well, thank you. This was really enlightening. And I love, it seems like you're on a good path to scaling something that is making such a big impact. So thanks for caring and for your innovation and for your business partner and everyone you work with as well. And thanks for coming on today.
No, thank you for having me, Megan. This was amazing.
Yeah, my pleasure. You're my first female guest, which I hate that it's taken me so many episodes, because this was fun.
Yeah, this is really nice. I think, yeah. At some point I'd like to talk about the, like, startups and like co-founderships and stuff like that.
Yeah, well, that could be part 2.
Yeah.
Okay.
Amazing. Okay.
There we go. Well, that's it for today on Green Disruptors. A huge thank you to Anjana for joining us and for the important work that Blusink is doing to protect our oceans and our climate future. If you enjoyed this conversation, don't forget to follow, share, and leave a review. You can also learn about our work helping green tech companies scale by reaching out to me on LinkedIn, just Megan, KJAR. Thanks for listening. I'll see you next time.